When you read the title of this video, there's a good chance a bunch of disasters came to your mind. Things like the abysmal Last of Us port, the saga of PSN account regional locking, everything about delisting old games to put up remakes in Steam, terrible receptions for games like Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and Until Dawn. All of those are PlayStation disasters on PC. And in many cases, well, it frustrated people. And after 5 years of porting their biggest first-party titles to Steam, we now see two major industry insiders suggesting that this strategy is being abandoned. And here's the thing. When you actually look at the financials, you can see exactly why PlayStation would do this. Two veteran journalists recently suggested that PlayStation are pulling back from PC. Now, on Digital Foundry's Q&A, John Lineman said that PlayStation had drastically reduced the quality and care of their ports in recent years, and he added, and I'll just quote him, "I actually have an inkling that they're pulling away from PC. Just watch this space." Now, the framing here is that after Jim Ryan left, Jim Ryan being the old leader of PlayStation, the current leadership just has less interest in PC as a platform. But taking this further is Jason Schreier. He teased something similar on the Triple Click podcast, suggesting that Insomniac's upcoming Wolverine game may never come to PC. Personally, I would have expected a belated port, maybe a year down the line, maybe two, but certainly not never. But that's just a podcast. Maybe he's not sure. That's what I would have said until Jason doubled down with a report that he posted on Bloomberg. According to that report, plans to ship Ghost of Yotai and other internally developed games like Saros over to PC have been cancelled and they will not hit PC. Now that would represent a major change for PlayStation. I mean, at the very last state of play, they devoted time to the reveal of Death Stranding 2 for PC, with Nixie staff breaking down the fidelity of the port and all the work that they did to ensure parity with PS5 Pro. So to see that, but then hear this, sounds a little bit strange. But of course, Death Stranding 2 is not a Sony game. Now, PlayStation do have the publishing rights for Death Stranding 2, but they don't own Kojima Productions. That means that Death Stranding 2 is still a third-party game. Today's story is about PlayStation's big first parties not coming to PC after their console release. And as for the reason, well, Jason Schreier's sources suggest that the recent games just have not sold well, and that within PlayStation, they think that the PC releases may actually hurt future PS5 sales. And here's the thing, we've looked through the numbers, and at least based on them, what they're saying kind of makes sense, and it doesn't seem worth it. $2.37 billion US. That is how much Tweaktown's Derek Strickland has calculated that Sony have made from off-console game and DLC sales since they began recording that stuff separately in their financials. Now that's a lot of money for ports of already finished games. Who would say no to just a cool little 2-point-something billion dollars? Of course, there's also the live service titles that benefit from boosted player counts, like, say, Helldivers being on PC. But as big as 2.37 billion is, all of these numbers are, of course, relative. And in the last quarter alone, PlayStation's other software segment brought in 24.6 billion yen, which is about $160 million. And that was a quiet quarter with no new ports. So, in context, that's not really all that impressive, is it? Especially when we see that in the same period last year, other software brought in half the revenue of physical game sales, and under 10% of digital sales, and under 5% of DLC and microtransactions. So, compared to PlayStation's core business, PC and Xbox are just, well, not that much business at all. And as for the growth, well, the growth that they're seeing is coming from the PlayStation Store and PSN subscriptions, not from these ports. And when we looked back through their financials, it became clear that other software has been functionally stagnant for 2 years, pretty much regardless of whether a port comes out. And remember, this isn't reporting profit, it's reporting revenue. So the porting costs, the marketing, the maintenance when a port doesn't turn out great, and the PR hit from the negative Steam reviews, which Valve are also taking their little 30% fee on, well, those things, are costs that will be making that revenue number not feel as great. And while it is true that the live service games do benefit from having more players in them, and the second-party games do need a bit of a boost for their devs to survive, the question is, how much does PlayStation actually benefit from putting their first-party titles on PC? Is it hurting them in the future? And that is the question that the PS5 barrier raised. And when I say PS5 barrier, that's not just a thing that I've went and made up. That is what Capcom said when they described basically just how disappointed they were in PS5 sales of Monster Hunter Wilds. So let's explain the PS5 barrier. In Capcom's latest financial Q&A, they revealed that 50% of their sales were now on PC as of the most recent quarter. And it all aligns with the PS5 barrier that Capcom president Haruhiro Sugimoto described last year. Basically, not enough PS5s have sold for their games to hit the console sales things that they expected. And of course, for Capcom, well, they're a multi-platform game maker, and they're one who makes big budget cutting-edge games. Those need to be on as many current-gen platforms as is possible to make their money back. Now, of course, that fewer people own the consoles. That's the same logic that seems to be moving Xbox towards just putting their games in everything, cause long-term strategy's one thing, but guess what? We need some goddamn money now. It seems also why they are happy enough to let their consoles be mini PCs. Now, in his report, Schreier even suggested that PlayStation executives, quote, may not be thrilled at the prospect of one of the company's flagship games like God of War running on the next Xbox console. So that's quite something. Now, we have to remember why PlayStation bothered with all this in the first place. They wanted to scale up their audience and sell more games. They invested in expanding. They bought up companies like Nixies to help with porting. So if they're walking away now, it suggests they've reached a limit on how much they're willing to devote to expanding off of their console. Maybe what they want to do is expand their console. And you gotta remember, these plans were cooked up years ago under Jim Ryan, which is of course also the same era that got us the lovely live service push. It has not worked out so great. Though they are fairly entrenched in live service, they've got Marathon, Tokon, and Horizon Hunters Gathering. They'll want to follow on Helldiver's success, but those are things that came after PlayStation had already invested heavily in bringing their big single-player franchises over to PC, and after they tried to gain a foothold by mandating PSN logins, which obviously didn't work, did it? I mean, it's funny, back in 2022, there was data mining that suggested plans for a PlayStation PC launcher. Obviously, players rejecting anything other than Steam sort of killed that plan. So they have sold games, which has been great for Mr. Gabe Newell and his friends. Maybe, though, it hasn't been as great for Sony as they would have hoped. Yes, they've sold games on PC, but they haven't actually built a platform foothold on PC. They likely know they face an uphill battle, that growth is not coming without substantially more investment, so it seems they are indeed cutting their losses. And this is where you need to know something. PlayStation have very different financial incentives than Capcom. Capcom will happily give 30% of their revenue over to Steam because they just need to be where you are, where the audience is. PlayStation, though, is the audience for their games. They make money by driving people to their own platform, plus, more than ever, being the platform holder, well, that's actually growing faster in revenue terms than actually making video games is. Which honestly is a little bit depressing, but it's through the likes of network services, DLC, and hardware upgrades, and we see this when we look through these companies' balance sheets. Growing their platforms is the thing that matters most, and that is especially right now because the games market is changing goddamn heavily. We need to see this in the context of competition. Now, PlayStation absolutely could just keep trying to get their games to a wider audience on PC, and you know what? I think a lot of us, maybe PC gamers, would really like that. And there were benefits to them in ending exclusives, more people playing games, granular control options. I mean, imagine getting to have settings in your video game. Madness. The potential for modding. But those were the benefits of a plan that was made when it seemed like game sales would never diminish, and that the PC would be an expanding market that could only boost console sales as well, because everything was growing. Things are a little bit different now. The PC market is growing as a whole, but PlayStation's share of it does not really seem to have changed that much over the last few years. Of course, they've had a sparse enough release schedule that could obviously be part of it, but what's more interesting to me is that their console sales are pretty much neck and neck for growth with the last generation of consoles. Now, you may think that keeping pace with the last generation is fine, and I guess it is fine, but these companies do expect to see growth, and the PS5 is not out there massively outselling the PS4. But then there's the big market factor that I don't think Jim Ryan could have predicted years ago, and that's the AI data center boom. Because currently, it's expected that data center boom and the impact that's having on the whole hardware supply chain, that could mean another 4 years of this generation. Now, for many, the main reason to buy a console had often been the exclusives. That was the core of Sony's strategy for the longest time. I suppose right now you could also buy a PS5 or PS5 Pro in order to avoid the sheer hell that is buying PC parts right now. And it's that strategy with exclusives that helped them absolutely just thwack Xbox into submission over the last 2 console generations. And as much as Xbox isn't really competing in those terms anymore, well, PC is doing really good. That could be an issue for PlayStation. And also, Nintendo's doing pretty good with the Switch 2. The Switch 2 can also play loads of third-party games at fairly good settings, at fairly good performance. So that will mean that PlayStation will actually have some real competition for whether they can even convince people to buy their console, especially considering their console right now is struggling to keep pace with its predecessor sales, which is not the sort of thing that you would expect in a growing market. But of course, as we've covered in the channel, the market growth isn't exactly coming from console games. And so for PlayStation, they need to redouble their efforts on the core thing that gives them the best finances. That is PlayStation. Giving players a reason to go over to PC does not help them with that goal. And big picture, it's just turned out that the market that PlayStation leadership built all their plans on just doesn't exist. Sony's leadership has changed, and they're now determined to cut, and I quote, unnecessary weight from PlayStation's operations. So that means if they see a lack of major benefit, and they maybe see a few risks, why the hell bother? And that probably means a lot less PC. So what happens next? I'd say it's pretty simple. PlayStation wants to build their moat. They want to give as many reasons as possible to come inside their ecosystem as profitably as is possible. But they have spent the last 5 years showing people that games would come to PC eventually. Remember, this whole story started with a warning not to wait for Wolverine. So it seems it could be the game that will signify the change here. Now you should remember, PlayStation never said they'd be bringing all of their games to PC. I mean, Astro Bot, as an example, is a critical darling, and it's never been ported over. Now you may say, yeah, but come on, it's so rooted in the DualSense controller. Well, if the DualSense controller stuff was working great with PC, then surely Astro Bot coming out in Steam would give a bunch of PC gamers a reason to buy their controller, which will be a high-margin product. But no, even though we can rationalize why it would make sense to move that game over, they clearly didn't. Though it's fair to say it's an exception, and Sony have trained players to think that their biggest games would come over to Steam. That's probably created an impression in the minds of PC gamers that, you know what, they'll just be patient gamers, it may come out later, but they don't need to buy a console for an exclusive. The problem for Sony, though, is they've invested a shitload of money in both infrastructure for moving things over to PC and infrastructure for PlayStation, including their business infrastructure, like the subscriptions. And it seems they're worried that their investment in PC could be hurting their investment in PlayStation. And considering they are PlayStation, I think PlayStation is going to be the one that comes first. Their hope now is that they can make more money by convincing people that a PS5 is worth buying because it's got games you can't get anywhere else. And once you're on a PS5, you'll spend on PlayStation Store, you might get PlayStation Plus. And all of those things will be to PlayStation's benefit. And all of this is a huge pivot from where they were just 5 years ago.